me to introduce myself. I don't know who my public is going to be, but they must surely know who I am. This is Man Ray, American-born, who chose France as his most permanent home. I seem to have become a legend, and all legends are supposed to be of the past. When the spirit moves me, I use a stick with some hairs on it. I become a painter. My barber and the violinist above me also use sticks with hairs on them. We have as much in common as if we were doing the same thing, but we are also different. They try to do their work as well as possible. I simply try to be as free as possible. I lived in New York from 1912 to 1914, but could no longer keep up with the pace. So I moved to a little shack in the country in New Jersey. There used to be some sort of an art colony there which had been abandoned, but the shacks were still there. And I installed myself and really began to paint like mad. I tried all the art schools in America. One after the other was a disappointment. My subjects were not the subject of the usual art students. Oh, I did a few portraits because the human face always interested me, but I began to invent things, invent subjects for my paintings, such as using the dream as a motive, or some incident in the street, things that were considered not exactly picturesque, let us say. I still respected my technique because I felt that no matter how extravagant, how unusual the subject of inspiration, one had to use a tried and expert technique to convey it or to impress the spectator.
Region, and it is going to keep us in clear skies tonight and lots of sunshine for tomorrow.
Francis Picabia and Marcel Duchamp. We seem to have something in common. They had both broken away from the cubism of Paris, and I had broken away from the schools around me, or from what my contemporaries were doing. So we sort of stuck together. And I think this was the beginning of the Dada movement in New York. And our principal object was to defy painting and literature, which is perfectly consistent with the activities of the Parisian Dadaists. Around 1916, 17, we received a letter from Paris. The Dada group, who had started in Zurich, Switzerland, had moved to Paris. Tristan Tzara tied up with a young group of poets in Paris, like Breton, Soupeau, Éluard, and Aragon. And they really started the movement of Dada in Paris in its full swing. Duchamp, Picabia, and myself did the same thing in New York. With this difference, that in Paris it became a great scandal, a great public scandal. In New York, we attracted no attention whatever. A group was founded in New York called the Société Anonyme, in which Duchamp and myself were the principal leaders, and we showed some of the Dada works. For instance, once when I took a lampshade that had come apart, which made a very pleasing spiral. And in the morning, there was the stand, but the spiral had gone. So finally we questioned the janitor. He said, "You mean that paper wrapping around the stand?" We managed to publish a Dada magazine in New York. Only one issue appeared. And I finally decided to leave New York. Duchamp, Picabia had gone back, so I packed up whatever paintings I had and left for France. The first day I arrived, I was welcomed with open arms. All the Dadaists were there at the cafe where they usually met to receive me. I was brought in by Duchamp. None of us could understand each other, but we didn't have to. We were Dadaists.
Manray avait tout de suite compris l'esprit Dada. Il y a eu une période pré-Dada à New York, qui était avec Picabia, Duchamp, Stieglitz et Manray. Et alors, ils ont compris tout de suite que l'épanouissement de Dada, ça n'a pas été tellement à Zurich, mais surtout quand Tzara est venu à Paris, alors à ce moment-là, Tzara a fait tout ce qu'il fallait pour faire du scandale, pour faire de la provocation, et Manray s'est associé, si vous voulez, à ça, mais timidement.
During the First World War, a number of exiles met in Zurich, poets and painters, and as a protest against the collapse of society, tried also to bring about a collapse of the arts. So the idea of revolt was in the air.
C'est Apollinaire qui nous a fait connaître Tzara. Il avait reçu le manifeste de Dada. Et ça nous avait intéressés parce que nous avons compris que l'attitude de Tzara était parallèle à la nôtre. une espèce de besoin de rupture avec le passé, de faire table rase. Et alors, vous savez, Zara était un homme extraordinaire, c'était un propagandiste extraordinaire, un public relation étonnant, et puis aussi un amateur passionné du scandale. Peu à peu, alors, s'est formé, si vous voulez, le groupe qu'on a appelé le mouvement Dada, où on disait, nous étions tous présidents.
It wasn't humorous at all. It may have looked like humor, but we called it sometimes black humor. It was corrosive humor. It was more than satire, more than irony. It was revolutionary. Duchamp was absolutely uncompromising.
Duchamp était un cas particulier. C'était un type qui avait décidé de ne plus se manifester. Et alors il était non pas un négateur, c'était un cynique. Il doutait de tout et de tous. Et vous savez que Duchamp a fait des objets comme l'urinoir ou bien le porte-bouteille. Eh bien lui, Man Ray a fait un objet qui était, que je crois est exposé, un objet qui s'appelait Cadeau. C'était à faire à repasser avec des clous. Et ça a même fait un peu scandale. Mais enfin, Man Ray n'a pas provoqué de scandale comme Picabia, par exemple.
This object of Man Ray is called the Cadeau. It's not a sadistic instrument. It is the idea to make a useful object unuseful.
Je me souviens, c'est moi qui avais proposé de faire une exposition, la première exposition Man Ray à Paris. Eh bien, il n'a eu aucun succès.
In 1921, the first exhibition of Man Ray in Paris was at the Philippe Soupault Gallery, Dada. It was a cold November day, and he met Eric Satie in the gallery, who said, "Young man, let's go out and have a hot grog." So they went out, and on the way they saw a hardware store. And since Man Ray didn't speak French, he asked Satie to get him a flat iron and tacks, which he did. Then he conceived the idea of the Cadeau. And the name Cadeau was because he was going to give it to the poet Soupault. During the exhibition, disappeared.
Unfortunately, somebody stole the gift during the opening, and I consoled it was Soupault, one of the young daddies. I said I'd make him another one. And I have been making other ones for the last 25, 30 years. I took up photography, first of all, to make reproductions of my own paintings, not being satisfied with the reproductions made by others. So good were they that when I arrived in France and showed them around, I was immediately commissioned to photograph the works of all my contemporary painters. I mean Braque, Picasso, Matisse, Derain, all the painters, Brancusi, the sculptor, asked me to photograph his works for him. It was really very encouraging. And being, as I said in the very beginning, always interested in the human face, I began to do portraits.
Man Ray avait toujours la tentation de demander à ses amis de se déshabiller pour les photographier. Moi, j'avais accepté, et puis j'avais mis mon chapeau quand même, et puis une canne et une cigarette. Tandis que Picabia, lui, avait accepté, mais alors il a l'air d'une brute. Vraiment épouvantable. Et puis alors Éluard aussi. Éluard, il a un peu un côté timide, je ne sais pas, c'est curieux.
My portraits of my illustrious contemporaries seem to have much more success even than my reproductions of their works. It was but a step from doing these portraits to photograph everybody who came along, and they did come along. They came through my studio by thousands, and I have a wonderful record in my files of contemporary life of that period.
Everybody who came into my studio in the 20s and 30s was photographed automatically, like a photomaton for passports. When they opened the door, the camera clicked and they were photographed.
Man Ray n'était pas encore un Parisien, c'était un Montparnassien. On le connaissait dans ce quartier où tout le monde se connaissait un peu. On connaissait Man Ray, on l'appelait Hello Man tout le temps. Même les garçons de café le connaissaient très bien parce que Man Ray était très généreux. Il aimait énormément les femmes, mais enfin les femmes lui rendaient bien. Il faut dire que par exemple, Kitty, qu'il a photographié sur toutes les coutures, eh bien, était très attachée à Man Ray.
Since I have these 2 arrows for my bow, it's a question of economy. If I have an idea and it's more direct and simpler to realize it in paint, I'll do it in paint. But if it's a portrait, let's say, or a particular scene that is already set up for me, why, it's so much more economical and direct to photograph it.
Man Ray avait besoin de gagner de l'argent et il a fait à ce moment-là des photos de mode qui sont très intéressantes. Et Man Ray a créé un style de photos de mode.
I began to see in photography a form of exercising a black and white art similar to etching or engraving of the old times. After all, it is the etching and engraving of today. It is drawing with light and chemistry instead of with a pencil or ink. I began to play with photography then for myself. I began to make abstract compositions without the use of a camera. Of course, we all know in childhood the little trick of placing a leaf in a frame with a piece of sensitive photographic paper and exposing it to the sun. In this way, we get a silhouette. I carried the process a little further by using three-dimensional objects, anything that came to hand, posing them on the sensitive surface in my darkroom, exposing it to light, and getting almost a three-dimensional effect in photography. Those were called rayographs. I began to experiment in other directions with my photography. For instance, one day, I got tired of working in the dark room. I'd been developing some films, so I turned on the bright light to look at them, not caring whether they would be ruined. Well, that has happened to other photographers by mistake. In my case, after examining the negatives, I found that a certain phenomenon had been produced, that there was a black line, a neutral zone between the lights and the darks. So I began to make prints. Since called solarization. The rayographs were begun in 1921. The solarization process was developed around 1929.
Il faut considérer chez Man Ray des personnages différents. Il y a le peintre, il y a le photographe et il y a le réalisateur de films.
All the Dadaists announced that they would give a grand presentation of the Dada process. Sarah came to me and said, "You've got to participate in this. Why not make a film for tomorrow night so we can project this film?" I said, "Yes, but a film takes some time to do." "Well, do it the way you do your abstract photographs. You know, just with anything, objects you have in the studio." I said, "All right." I got a couple of 100 feet of cinema film. I cut them up in pieces, laid it out on my table in the dark room, sprinkled it with salt and pepper, pins and needles, thumbtacks, bits of paper, developed it, stuck the pieces together, and we had a film for the Dada presentation the next day. The whistling began about 10 minutes after the show started because 12 poets started to read their poetry simultaneously. The audience began to whistle and boo, but still they kept their seats until my film was projected. Things began to jump on the screen, and the people began to jump around in the theater as well. One man shouted that he wanted his money back. Another one shouted to him to keep quiet, that if he didn't like it, he could leave. So the first man hauled off and hit him in the face. It was a free-for-all then. That was practically the end of Dadaism. We couldn't go any further, and there was a lull for a year or so while we reorganized our forces. People have been saying before that Dadaism was dead, but nobody knew it better than the Surrealists. One might say that the Dada movement ended officially around 1923, and it was most of the same poets and painters who slid over into the Surrealist movement. The Surrealists managed to publish several magazines, and they were all read with a great deal of interest and seemed to influence the younger generations very much. I think it is primarily a literary movement because the word counts for more than any plastic presentation. I said that recently to André Breton, who is the father of surrealism, so-called. I believe that there is no such thing as surrealist painting. It is the writers who are surrealists who have put their fingers on certain works amongst our painters and have immediately called them surrealist works. Breton was a very rigorous person, quick to criticize any departure from the rules or what he had established as the rules of surrealism, things that were accepted or not acceptable. We were often criticized for divergences, the way one would be criticized in a political movement, in a political party.
J'ai connu Breton toute sa vie. Et voyez-vous, j'ai connu en somme 3 ou 4 Bretons. On ne peut pas dire qu'il y a un seul Breton. Je dois dire qu'à la fin de sa vie, il était résigné. Il a été, si vous voulez, un peu choqué, même, je dirais même bouleversé, par le fait que le surréalisme était devenu l'étude des universitaires. On appelait surréaliste n'importe quoi. Il y avait des crimes surréalistes, il y avait des divorces surréalistes. Il y avait, enfin, on avait absolument, pas méprisé, mais si vous voulez, vulgarisé le surréalisme. Et ça, il en souffrait, puisqu'il était tout de même resté très profondément surréaliste.
Surrealism also is a movement of revolt, but it chooses its own weapons, new weapons. Surrealism tries to replace, not to annihilate. Surrealism was a more constructive movement. I think it was influenced by the writings of Freud, psychology, the idea of going, as in Dadaism, to new sources of inspiration, the dream world, automatism, chance and hazard also figured. But it was quite different because a little more attention was paid to technique, which I had always insisted on. Am I a photographer or am I a painter? Well, do I have to choose between the two? Why can't I have both? I am greedy. I do many other things, too, some of which I cannot even mention here.
Manray habe ich kennengelernt 1933, als diese große Ausstellung im Salon des Surreindépendants war, das war überhaupt der Ort, an dem ich alle Surrealisten kennengelernt hatte, weil dort war ich eingeladen worden, mit auszustellen, und durch das lernte ich dann alle kennen. Auch er lud mich manchmal zum Mittagessen ein nach den Aufnahmen, und das fand dann statt in seinem Atelier Rue du Val de Grâce und war für damals super modern. Es wäre auch jetzt noch modern. Es ist wirklich sehr schön eingerichtet. Ich glaube, ein dunkler Spannteppich und Möbel, die er selbst entworfen hatte. Diese vielleicht bekannten Fotos, die er machen ließ, aus Sperrholzplatten mit ein paar Schrauben und Kissen. Wirklich sehr gut eingerichtet, und das hat mir Eindruck gemacht, denn es war sehr selten, für mich wenigstens, damals 1933 oder 1934 solche Appartements zu sehen. Und eben an den Wänden hingen seine Bilder, ich bewunderte ihn auch sehr als Maler, ich fand das sehr gut. Bilder von, ich weiß jetzt, sie waren etwa von 1928, wo er mit der Farbtube direkt gemalt hat, so Tupfen oder auch Striche. Manray sagte mir, was hätte er anders sagen können? Heute gehen wir ins Atelier von Marcussi. Er war ein Maler. Ich glaube, er war mit dem Kubisten und war auch ein Graveur. Und er hat mir, glaube ich, vorher nicht gesagt, was er dort vorhatte. Nun, also dann bat er mich auszuziehen, was ich tat, weil mir das vollkommen egal war. Ich erinnere mich auch nur an das Foto, wo ich den Arm über den Kopf lege. Dann hat er gesagt, jetzt mach die Augen auf, jetzt mach die Augen nach unten. Ich weiß nur noch, dass Manray nach einiger Zeit, ich weiß nicht, ob Wochen oder Monat nachher, mich fragte, ob ich erlaube, dass man das Foto in Minotaur bringt. Und ich sagte, ja. Aber meine armen Eltern, denen hat man dann gesagt, ich lasse mich jetzt für solche Pariser Revuen fotografieren. La Belle Poule und La Parisienne. So.
When I met Manray in California, we had dinner the first night, we went dancing, took me rowing, Westlake Park. The next day we had dinner, dancing, and then we were together forever. The least motion I did, Manray would photograph me. California, Beverly Hills. Manray, myself, Dorothea Tanning, and Max Ernst. We decided to get married. It was called a double wedding in Beverly Hills. We never know to this day if we were not each one the husband and wife of each other. This is the first car we had in California, called the Graham Supercharger. He was a very fast driver. During that time, a very good friend of ours was Jean Renoir. Stravinsky. And we often went to Big Sur, to Henry Miller, the writer. And of course, Ava Gardner, gorgeous creature. It was lovely having all these beautiful people around. We left California for New York and took a boat called the Ducasse to come back to Paris. The boat took 9 days. It was a long trip. When we arrived in Paris, there was a general strike. Nothing was working. And we stayed in a little hotel, Montparnasse, for 3 months until we found this studio in Rue Ferrou. It was a great big barn, all white, and we slept on the floor. And then eventually, 2 or 3 months, he put up that balcony. We set up housekeeping, and he started to paint and photographed all his works of art. But he wouldn't do photography professional anymore. Metronome. First it was called Object to be Destroyed. In 1958 it was destroyed. And he made a new one. He called it Indestructible Object. So we used, the original eye was an eye from a friend. And this one is a blinking eye. And then in a phrase I read, he said, cut out the eye from a photograph of one you love and put it on the metronome until you can't stand it, then hammer the whole thing and destroy it. This object is called smoking device. With all the wires, the smoke comes out immediately. It's a pipe stand, marbles.
Pleasure and the pursuit of freedom are the guiding motives in all human activity. The pursuit of freedom is work. The pursuit of pleasure is the play. Let us enjoy or ignore. That is the only attitude to take in reference to works of art or any human activity. And all play are the signature of their authors. Would you have me change my signature or my sex?
Manray designed very many chess sets, 9 or 10 different designs. If he didn't have anyone to play with, he would play from books and newspapers. And whenever Marcel Duchamp came here, they'd always mull over a problem or play a game.
They were very individual, but they mainly enjoyed seeing each other. When you are a painter, being a painter is almost like a language. You develop your own language, and then you have to repeat it or speak in that way. And Marcel always wanted to find something different, not to repeat himself in that way. When he had the nude descending a staircase, he was very much in the public eye. Everybody was always watching to see what he was doing. So the only way he could reserve his freedom of any kind is just to say, I'm not working. He was fascinated by our time and machinery and all the, even things related to movies and things like that. All those Muybridge photographs and so forth. And I'm sure Man was too. So he had a great relationship there, and Man was fascinated in anything new, and so was Marcel.
And I don't want to produce a new collection every year. I have never painted a recent picture.
Art is not a science. Art is not an experiment. There is no progress in art any more than there is progress in making love. There are simply different ways of doing it. There may be a certain progress in the individual, but his signature remains unchanged.
When I am asked what is my object, what am I after in my work? Well, anything that comes into my mind, of course, as a Dadaist, as a surrealist, things of chance, you know, would be my sources of inspiration.
Whatever the others disapproved of, that was the direction I was to take in my production. You see, it is revolutionary, but all worthwhile art is revolutionary.
They say that I'm ahead of the times. I said, no, I'm of my time. It's the others who are behind the times. I am very curious and I want to be free. One way of being free is never to repeat myself if possible, and to contradict myself even. My photography was my painting and drawing. For painters, well, photography is not art, can never be art. Well, yes, I've changed my attitude for a while now. I would say now, art is not photography.
Let me end this explanation with a statement. The tricks of today are the truths of tomorrow.